This interview is part of the SSCA Circumnavigators Summit, sharing experiences of members who circumnavigated. All engaged in this project are volunteers providing information solely for entertainment and education purposes. SSCA may edit and publish the interviews in the SSCA Circumnavigation Summit in audio and video formats to benefit its membership and as a recruiting tool. SSCA and participants assume no responsibility for the accuracy or validity of information shared in these interviews. Opinions stated do not necessarily reflect those of the Seven Sea Cruising Association.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the SSCA Circumnavigators Summit. My name is Jackie Lee from Trimaran Sloopmoosh, and I have the privilege to interview some of these special members who have completed a circumnavigation. Many volunteers at SSCA are working hard to make the organization new and fresh and relevant to our members. So we hope you will enjoy this new series. Many sailors wonder what it takes to make a circumnavigation and whether they could do it. We will be interviewing SSCA members who did it. Believe it or not, over 100 members sailed around the world just in between the period between 2001 and 2019. And bravo to them. You will have a chance to hear many varied types of sailors. Solo sailors, families, 2 to 3 year voyages, 20 plus years, international members, former SSCA board members, motor vessel owners, celebrities, and regular sailors just like us. So, without further ado, let's get right to the interview. Welcome everybody, and we have very special guests for this interview, Bruce and Joan Kessler. And they were some of the first, if not the first, who circumnavigated on a personal motor vessel. The vessel's name was Zopilote, and probably Bruce is going to tell you the origins of that name. When we call them special because they have many different achievements in their life before the boating life. Bruce started out as a Formula One race driver, then became a movie and TV director with movies under his name such as Scarface and TV series such as Mission Impossible. And Joan, better known in her career as Joan Freeman, is an actress. And she was in some movies like Roustabout with Elvis Presley and Tower of London with Vincent Price. And after going on through the movie business, they were also deep-sea fisher people with wonderful records of deep-sea fishing, and later became cruisers on a motor vessel and circumnavigated. So
Thank you. It's nice to be aboard.
We're all anxious to hear about motor vessels and reading some background about you. Bruce, you were kind of the first person who wanted to design a personal boat to go for long distances. Perhaps you didn't first think about going around, but you were instrumental in developing a long-distance motor vessel. So can you tell us briefly your background and how you got into boating?
Well, I was born in the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle area, and that area of the U.S. has more boats per capita than any other part of the United States. And, of course, those boats may only be 8 feet to long, a lot of those boats, but everybody has a boat. And one side of my family was a commercial fishing family. So that's where my background starts. In Seattle, born on the water in Vashon Island, where we had a home. And I've been, like all Northwestern kids, I've been on the water since I was old enough to walk.
All right, and Joan?
Well, I always enjoyed fishing, which Bruce and I have done since we've been together, and did that camping and doing freshwater fishing with my family. We didn't have a boat, but at one point there was a boat in my life, and we did little fishing out of Redondo Beach here in California. And then when I got together with Bruce, he was very much into marlin fishing and albacore fishing and all of that, and we just continued that.
Okay, when you first started on your boating, did you think ever to go around the world on a motor vessel?
No, it never crossed my mind. I was basically, always a fisherman. And when I say I'm a fisherman, I'm a captain, and being a captain is like being a guy. What you're doing is taking people out and trying to find fish for them to catch.
I was normally the one, and our other friends who would come with us, we did most of the fishing, and Bruce would just give criticism from the bow. He would tell us where he was going to take us and what was going to happen, and we had to be on our toes. And we did catch a lot of albacore when albacore season was really great. And then after that, we would go marlin fishing, which we would smoke the marlin sometimes. Other than that, normally we would catch and release.
Marlin are a sport fish in the state of California, where you're fishing out of here, so it's not a commercial fish that you can sell. So when we would smoke a fish, it would be, of course, for our consumption. And other fish, if we killed a fish, we would give to charity, like a hospital.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so you had the critical job of going out and finding the fish, Bruce, because that's when the pressure is on to take out those folks out and then know where the fish are. So I guess that's you learn quite a lot, how to read the seas and how to know where the fish are going to be.
That's correct. That is the job of the captain, and is to be able to read the signs just like you'd look for wind if you were a sailor. You begin to be able to read the ocean and read the environment around you that give you the clues to finding the fish you're looking for.
Bruce has always been an excellent navigator. Remember, when we did our circumnavigation, that began in 1990. That's some time ago. And we didn't have all the navigation things that are so readily available. Shoot in our telephone, everything. You can use your telephone now to navigate around in the streets, and even I've seen people do it on the ocean. But we didn't have all that. But Bruce was always knew where he was. He always kept good track of where he was when we were fishing. And of course, when you're fishing, you're going in various patterns. You're not going in a straight line someplace. So he was excellent at that.
And we fished it was quite normal for us to fish 50, 60 miles offshore. We were just limited by the fuel. And we would not try and come in at night. If it was a weekend, for instance, we would just throw a parachute or drift and hope we knew where we were when the sun came up.
All right. Great. So you learned a lot of skills out there chasing the fish around. So that's great, because you helped me segue into my next question of the year that you started. So you say you started in 90. And from where did you start?
Marina del Rey, which is in, I know that you're in the Far East, and this Marina del Rey is actually adjacent to the city of Los Angeles, closer actually to Venice, Santa Monica, or Venice.
We left there for our trip on February 28th, 1990.
Okay. You don't know the exact date. That's great. And how many years did it take you to circumnavigate?
I had taken 3 years out of my life and decided that at that time I could afford to do that. Both of our fathers had passed away. Both of our mothers were healthy. And financially, I felt that I was in a position that I could take that period of time to actually not circumnavigate, but to go to Australia to fish the Australian waters, the Great Barrier Reef.
So your first idea was just to take Zopilote to Australia, so kind of halfway around and go to do some fishing in Australia.
Well, the Gulf War interfered with that. When we were ready to leave Australia to go west, they took our insurance away. Lloyd's insured us, and they were concerned about the scuds in the Suez Canal zone. So we had to change our plans and go to New Zealand to wait for the war, which was about to start, and we had no idea how long that would last.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Can you briefly describe the general route you took?
We went to Hawaii, and that was the longest part of the longest route on our trip. It was 2,250 miles from where we were, and that particular piece of water would then determine how capable the boat was of doing the rest of the adventure at that time scheduled to Australia. The trip to Hawaii, which basically gave us all the information we needed to know what was ahead of us. One, we carried 4,000 gallons of fuel. We averaged 8 knots, 7.9, and we had a 23 kW, 1,200 RPM generators. We had 2 of them. And we burned approximately what we thought we should, both with one generator running, and we're a single engine boat. We burned 1 mile a gallon. So we basically burned our combined total with one generator running all the time. We burned 1 gallon a mile for the entire journey, which was about 2,250 miles. And that was the most important information we gathered. That gave us a safe range of 3,000 miles, in my opinion.
Why did you design the boat the way you did? And where did you have it built? And what were your requirements when you had the boat made? Besides I'm sure that what you just explained was part of what you wanted in your design, but let's talk about Zopilote more, about your requirements and how she was built and those kinds of things.
We were fishing at Cabo San Lucas with a 50-foot sport fisher that I had put together, and we were fueling at the fuel pier at the time in a boat called Her Grace. It was a Monk design boat, which we refer to as a bait boat, the type of boat that they have lift poles. Those are lines without hooks that they fish commercially for tuna with. Her Grace was about 90 feet, designed by Ed Monk. And as she lay alongside of us, and I started thinking about a boat of this design that could fish offshore or go anywhere. And she was my inspiration. She'd been designed by Ed Monk Jr., and that led me to the design of Zopilote, which ended up being designed by Steve Seaton and built by Delta, who were a commercial boat builder in Seattle. She was the first yacht of her design and created a new class of long-range cruising boats, which was not intended to be at the time. It was the way that it worked out. So when she was finally launched, which was in 1985, she was quite a different kind of boat than anyone had seen. She got quite a bit of publicity in the magazines, who were not anxious to publicize her, but for lack of anything else, had put her in the magazines, and they all had a terrific response from the readers who had never seen a boat like this and wanted more information, which led to the beginning of this class of boat.
She wasn't one of those fluffy super yacht kind of things. She was a boat built to work and built to do long distance. And now, this is a perfect opportunity for me to ask, what does Zopilote mean?
Zopilote, or as the Mexicans would say, or Zopilote, or as we would say, is a scavenger bird. It's in the Mexican dictionary as a Mexican, as a buzzard, a Mexican buzzard. And the reason for the name was that before that, I never had a boat that had, in the beginning of my fishing career, that had the range to get out, didn't have enough fuel to get out to fish with the bigger boats. And I would always be just picking up the leavings that were left over in the shallower waters or in the waters not as far out. So we named her Zopilote. All my boats have had the name Zopilote in them.
That's good, yes. Interesting that your idea to take a working kind of boat and make it into a personal kind of cruising yacht was very popular. And I think what's great now is that you, speaking to us now, there's a lot of SSCA members who are more interested in motor vessels and ones that are practical for long-distance cruising. Now, do you remember how you heard about SSCA and why you decided to join?
To be honest with you, I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but I maybe I ran across some of they were like a few page thing that you would put out, and they would be interesting things from people who are in a variety of exotic places and talking about problems they've had or how to get your groceries, the necessities, things like that. And I just thought it was very interesting, and I think I probably just ran across it someplace among our friends or whatever, and we wanted to become members because I wanted to get the information, because there wasn't a whole lot of the kind of detailed, if you want to not be concerned about getting your parts or getting your food, you want to know where to go and who's been there before and what to expect. And I thought they had the most information. There was one book that we got that had information on various places, but not very much. Not very much. And that's why I appreciated the Seven Seas Cruising Organization.
Maybe you might have even picked up one of the bulletins in a book exchange or something, because the SSCAers at the time, when they were printed bulletins, we would leave them here and there and pass them on to different people to pass on information, and great that you found that valuable and that you decided to join in spite of the fact that they were a little bit snooty about sailing as opposed to motorboats.
Well, they were mainly sailboats, and they didn't seem to object. They'd give the information to whomever wanted it. That wasn't a problem. But I think they were very helpful. They must have been very helpful that far back for sailboats that wanted to go out.
We didn't finish the route around the world. We got you to New Zealand. And then what happened with the Gulf War and that? How did you finally make your way back around?
Well, our route was to Honolulu, which I've already discussed with you. From that, it was what we described as Down Island, on down to Palmyra, which was a small series of reefs that had been hooked together by the U.S. government during World War II, put a landing strip together to refuel planes to get to the South Seas, which was deserted, had no habitat on it when we arrived. There were only a Belgian sailboat had come in while we were there, but there are no charts of the islands or as how they had hooked the reefs together. And there was a wrecked airplane on the landing strip that had been there from World War II, and still fuel cans, still full of fuel, so on and so forth, but no people. There were a couple buildings.
Interesting thing that I remember about we were there were, I think they were French, the sailboat that had a chainsaw, and they went up and cut in the trees up on the little rise there. They cut a section there so people could line up on that to come through the reef. And I had never thought of a sailboat having a chainsaw, but they found that very valuable.
and there were no charts. And there are no charts of this, so you're kind of lost. It was only sailors that had been in there, and I believe one other power boat had been in there. It's about 400 miles south of the big island in Hawaii, and uncharted, you know. Yeah, and we went on to Fanning from there. Fanning was another one of these little islands that was it was an atoll. I mean, there and it had people living there that were paid to live there from the Gilbert Islands. They had an administrator on the island who was from New Zealand. Very small entrance, and the only thing they had to do was fish. There was no other activity, and there was a general store where they gave them everything, you know. And Doctors Without Boundaries would fly in twice a year. He drank a bottle of our scotch and explained the whole situation.
That was the first time I learned that when it says there's a small place where you might be able to get supplies, what it was it had a counter, a plain counter open, like you would find a bar right off the beach. And they had a few cans of things on it, and that was it. That was the store. So if you didn't catch fish in the ocean, I don't know what you were going to eat. So they were greatly motivated to fish.
Fish and coconuts.
Right.
And they have coconut crabs that are considered quite a delicacy.
Oh, okay. That I could live on.
Yeah, from there we were on down to Christmas Island. Christmas Island, with our 10-foot draft, we were too deep, I felt, to go into the harbor. So we anchored in the lee there, and that was also a refueling spot for us. And we took on fuel from cans. The fuel was fine, but the 50-gallon drums that they brought it out in weren't so fine. And so fuel being our most important asset on these long-range trips, we used 1,000 meter or 1,000 Raycor filters exterior of the tank to take the rust out. We fueled there, and that was the key thing that we did while we were there. We also left there for Bora Bora. We stopped at the little island the French had used as an atomic experiment on the way, and then arriving in Bora Bora, we realized that there was one piece of information with all the research I had done that I had not realized, that magnetic compasses would start rolling up, that you needed a southern compass and a northern compass. And I had to modify my own compass to get it to level out. And again, that was all we had for navigation in those days.
Wow, okay. But then you did manage to recalibrate your compass for the southern hemisphere.
Well, I leveled it for the southern hemisphere when I got into Bora Bora. Early in the morning, as we always do, I waited at the local, I guess they call it a key or K, quay, and was an official shack at the end of it. And I saw two guys in uniform come down, and I knew that it was going to be French. And I got my little captain's briefcase together, and I went down and presented my papers to them, figuring out, well, you know, this is going to be a rough go-around with the French. And they looked at me and said, well, you're going to Papeete, aren't you? And I said, yes, but not for another week or two. They said, well, you can clear in there. And I said, well, I'm going to be here. We're here, and we're going to be around. They said, that's fine. Enjoy yourself. That was the end of the paperwork there.
Yes, that's one thing. One thing about a lot of the French islands, they're quite casual about those clearing in kind of things. Well, yeah. When we came into the Marquesas, we found out that you kind of do an informal check-in, and then you have a year to get to Papeete and do the formal clearing in, and we took about a year. We took all advantage. So yeah, that's the great thing about the French. Oh yes, okay, welcome, and you can do it in Papeete. Oh, that's a wonderful story.
It was the same for us, and they treated us the same way. It was great. And of course, we were carrying papers as a research vessel for Western tuna, and we looked just like what we are. I mean, at the time, that was what a research vessel looked like. Nowadays, we see yachts that look like that. But we were always treated that way, treated very well, and had lots of little adventures. I'm sure you did too. The Tuamotus and places like that where it was very shallow was difficult for us, but we always managed. We had our little adventures like every boat has, and lots of fun. We saw boats coming from the U.S. that sailing vessels that we had seen a year before were now arriving sometimes in the Tuamotus, and in some cases we could help them because you know how low they are, you've been there, that we could stay by the entrance so they had some idea of exactly where it was, because we had no real navigational aids in those days.
That was, yeah.
That would give us, you know, accurately tell us where we were.
Yes, right. Okay. Yeah, I heard Joan mention satellite. No, did you have? Yeah, that's right. Before the GPS, there was instruments that could get a fix like in three hours. That was, you know, great technology then. It was a miracle that you could get a fix like 3 or 4 hours apart, and that was that was really, really great.
You know, you're right. Absolutely, that was a miracle then, and we were glad to have it. You know, we had none of the navigational aids that existed at the time when we started this trip.
For communication, now is like something like what we're doing now. You couldn't do anything like this then. At least we didn't have the sophistication. So we got our first computer on the boat, and it was installed in Hawaii, and then we got something called Standard C, which was our way of communicating at home. And it was a miracle as far as I was concerned. We could send a message, and normally it was sent to the Standard C place. They would transcribe it and then send it on to my mother, Bruce's mom, the yacht club here in Marina del Rey. And that was how we did our communication. Otherwise, it was going to be with
High Seas.
With High Seas Radio, which
in which you had the license.
Oh, I had the license. I had to go get that license. Made me crazy.
And it's once you had to know Morse code in those days.
Yeah.
Or signal sideband. With ham, yeah. So we had the radio set up for ham and single sideband, but what Joan just described was an operation from Denmark, I think, called Tron and Tron. A company in Seattle called Northern Marine sent it to us we were in Honolulu when that was brought over and installed, and it changed our life. I think they call it email now, but in those days it was called Standard C, and you operated it. The way it operated to start with was that you sent a message on the computer, and the message went to right outside of Washington, D.C., where it was taken off the computer, put on a fax, and sent to whoever the message was going to. And that was in its earliest stages. By the time this was all over, and it was the only satellite at the time in the Pacific. They had just put it up. In fact, they had not put it up until we had left. We had no idea we were going to get this wonderful piece of equipment that kind of changed our life.
All right. Yes. It's so interesting to think back, and it doesn't sound like it was that long ago. But then when you start to say, in the 90s, that sounds like 90s. That's pretty modern. But then then you realize that how long ago that was when you start talking about technology. All right, good. That's about communications. So what about weather? How did you get weather reports? How did you avoid bad weather? Or did you get into any bad weather? And how did that work out?
Well, it actually, quite by chance, worked out very well when we got this machine, because we had been on the East Coast with the boat, and we'd made friends with a company called Blue Water Books and Charts, then owned by Milt Baker, who started the company. It was a small store at the time, but there was a experiment going on that was done by one of the big companies, and they had a bunch of weather types. What do you call a weatherman?
They came from the Navy, didn't they?
Yeah, well, some of them came from the Navy, and they were doing this in Fort Lauderdale on board a boat that one of these big companies owned, and they would come into Blue Water Books and Charts, and we made their acquaintance.
Have information on the winds at certain times and whatnot for races. And Bruce said, hey, there's people that can look for the wind, there's people that can look for no wind. So we want the other end of that. And he was introduced to these people, Walt Hack, who's no longer with us, but Walt was the person that we would have communications with. And he would do that. He was looking for that best wind across in various places and did an excellent job.
What we were required to do was to send our location, our lat long, and what the weather conditions were at the time when we received it. But when we got this wonderful machine from Tron really made it simple, and we were able to do our weather routing that way. I'm not familiar if you are aware of Steve Dashew's book.
Yes.
On storm tactics. Well, in Steve's book, Steve talks about heavy weather and storm tactics, and he lists 5 ocean crossing captains, one of which we were one of them, and he asked the question, how much heavy weather did you see? And we all had the same answer, very, very little, because we avoided it.
That's the great answer. This is so interesting to hear what a different way that you communicated, and the very different way that you got weather, the weather conditions or weather maps, and the different strategy naturally of a motor vessel is it's best to go when there's no wind and the seas are calm. We're thinking about that a lot when we're here in Southeast Asia, where a lot of times there's no wind. So, yeah, and we think, okay, if you had that motor vessel, you just look for where there's no wind and seas are flat, and let's go, and what a pleasant trip.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you have any kind of strategies for piracy avoidance, or what you would do if you encountered them, or any kind of security issues? How did you plan, or what were your strategies for that?
When we got to Australia, was it the first time? None of this had started by that time. At that particular time, their piracy had not.
We didn't hear about it. I mean, just started then.
Yeah,
Okay.
the only piracy that we were aware of was a freighter that had been pirated just outside of Singapore, like 3 miles outside of. And we had heard about that, and so I flew up to Singapore and talked to the Marine Police about it, and they said no, there was no problem with piracy at the time with yachts. Small sailing vessels may have had, or smaller sailing vessels may have had some issues when they got too friendly with the natives, if the natives thought they needed something off their boat. But there was no problem for us, so I brought the boat up from Singapore. I brought the boat up from Australia to Singapore. I mean,
Yeah, we were at Christmas in Singapore.
yeah, we were actually at Christmas and left on New Year's. Yeah, we were boarded on the Malacca Straits by a patrol boat. So, we're jumping around a lot as to where we've been and where we were and how we got there. But we were, getting to Australia. We were down to the Cook Islands and Tonga, Fiji, and New Caledonia, which we had a very interesting experience in on our way from Fiji to New Caledonia with a tramp steamer that I was a target on a radar. It was behind us. I picked them up. I'd switch the radar up every so many hours, and slowly catching us very, very slowly. But towards the end of the day, he came alongside of us, and we could see it was a tramp steamer, and he called us and wanted to know if we had a doctor on board, and we said no, but we had a large medical supply if he needed. What did he need? And he said he didn't think he needed anything. His engineer had fallen through a hatch and broken his leg. And we wanted to know what our plans were, and we said we were going into New Caledonia, and he said that he was going to stop because he was a new skipper on this boat, and the radar only had a 3-mile working range, and he was afraid of running at night, getting there early in the morning. And I told him that I felt confident that if he followed us, he would be fine. And he finally made the decision to do that, to slow down and follow us, and I would arrive in daylight and find my way through the entrance, which we did. And when we got the boat secured, I called to rent a car, and an older gentleman came down in New Caledonia. An older gentleman came down with the papers, and I was signing the papers and handing them back to him. And he looked at me and said, "You're American?" And I said, "Yes, we are Americans." And he dropped his things and threw his arms around me and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I was so confused. I had no idea of what he was talking about. But what he was talking about, as he explained, during World War II, the Australians all took off and went to Europe to fight for us, and we had to come over to defend Australia and New Caledonia to keep the Japanese from taking New Caledonia, and that's why he was reacting that way.
Oh.
Because our troops to come over there. It was really quite touching.
Yes, what a great story. Did you ultimately go through the Red Sea?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. That was, I don't know if you're familiar with that area. Have you been up through there?
No. Looking at the situation, I don't know whether we ever will, but go ahead with your experience.
Well, our timing was correct, but the only information that we could get really came from some of the British sailors that have written books, and sailors that had been up in that area, and what they talked about was when entering the Red Sea, before you get to Djibouti, which would be your first port of call, there was an island that was about 30 miles off the beach that the Russians had been giving weapons to, and the weapons they would fire if there was a sailboat close enough to use for target practice.
That's what we were told.
That's what we were told with the British sailors that had been in the area. And so we decided to go down the middle. I decided to make that down the middle and figured 15 miles they couldn't hit us with anything. Djibouti was a fascinating place, and we stayed there for a while. Cornell was having his first around the world race, and there they had a container that they sent that they would ship with all their equipment and so on and so forth for communications on it, and it did not arrive, and they asked us to take over since we did have the communications to coordinate for them with that first around the world rally, and we took over that. So we stayed there for some time. It was quite an interesting place and quite different, and at the same time we were trying to get into Saudi Arabia, and we were having no luck with that at all. Even though the Saudi embassy was a wonderful place to go, they were quite nice to us. The U.S. embassy had no use for us. It was a interesting place, and as my wife will tell you about how much she liked the market and the foods.
Oh, the markets were small, but they had all their frozen chicken and whatnot came in there. Lovely small markets, and the best chicken I'd ever had. And it was frozen, came from France, and it was wonderful, and I was very pleased to have it. We had great food at the yacht club there, the Djibouti Yacht Club, where we signed in. They had a roof kind of, when I say restaurant, tables and chairs and whatnot, but it was great food. We had good food there. We never ate any other place except on the boat. We made it up the Red Sea, and then we had to deal with the Egyptians, which was an experience.
I should say that, I should add that at this time, the Red Sea was closed. It was after the Gulf War, and we were under restriction. And you would hear voices on the radio that sounded like 16-year-old kids from Kansas. And every ship that came in had to identify itself with it, fly a helicopter over it. They would ask for everybody if the ship was going to go up to Eilat, that ship would have to be inspected, and they would put troops on it. A helicopter would drop them down, and they would have all the crew on deck and assembled in a certain order, and they would inspect the vessel to make sure there was no cargo on board. They didn't want to go up.
The Gulf of Aqaba.
Yeah, Gulf of Aqaba. They were going up the Gulf of Aqaba. So it was quite different to us when we identified ourselves as a motor yacht. They didn't know what we were. It was standby, because nobody had ever heard of a motor yacht. And eventually that we were identified. They flew over us and cleared us, but they had just never seen anything like it. It was quite a different experience.
Bruce is not much of a tourist, but I am, and I wanted to go see some of the wonderful sights in Egypt.
Right.
And I left Bruce on the boat, and I went into Cairo by myself. I wouldn't do it today.
Wow.
For any amount of money, but I got a taxi, and I went to the bus stop, and the adventures are many, but they ended up getting stopped by the police, and they totally ignored me in the back seat. And I finally climbed out, grabbed my suitcase, and let them go on the way because they were going to go someplace else, and I had to hail another taxi. I ended up meeting my friend at the American Express in Cairo. We had a room, so that was okay. But I got to see some wonderful things. Bruce never got to see them. But I don't know that he cared. He was watching out for the boat at all times. He had the best experience, and I missed out on it.
Well, yeah, let me tell you about going into the Red Sea from there. Number one, you're directed to the yacht club by the port captain, and I followed his directions in there. And the minute I saw the yacht club where they had double moorings, bow and stern moorings, I realized I thought our boat would be uncomfortable on it, and I started getting radio calls the minute I got to the yacht club to bring the boat over to this side or the other side, tie it up on one of the seawalls, and I didn't want to do that. And I finally got another call came in, and this guy was the port captain and said, "I am port captain. You don't have to do any of the above. You can go out and anchor where you think you're safe," which is what I elected to do. But it was here at this point, we were anchored fairly close to the canal, and we had probably the highlight of the trip, which was we saw coming eastbound, coming towards coming through the Suez towards the Red Sea, a aircraft carrier, and I had one deckhand on board with me at the time, and I said, "Get the U.S. flag out." And I was looking at it through the glasses. Yeah, we had our flag sheathed naturally. All the time while we were on anchor, we wore out flags so fast, and I had Danny get the flag out. And as the ship approached, I could see everybody was on the ship's starboard side looking at the city. There was nothing but desert on the other side. And I figured it had to be a U.S. carrier, and when it saw our flag, it called us, and we answered, and I don't remember whether I called him or he called me first, but I could hear myself on his PA system as I talked to him, and he asked us what we were doing, and we told him, and we asked him what he was doing, and he said, "We're keeping up our presence." This was just after the Gulf War had ended, and I talked to him for probably 4 or 5 minutes on the radio, and I could hear myself on the PA system. They were all listening to me on deck, and we were cheering when they were hearing when we were from San Diego, and I wished him a safe trip, and his last line to me was, "Well," he said, "this is the captain of the America wishing you a safe journey. We'll see you in San Diego." And it was the highlight of the trip. It was just so great to see this U.S. carrier. It was really the highlight of our trip, speaking with the captain of the America.
All right. Yes. What an impressive sight to see an aircraft carrier come by. That's a great story about your highlight. With hindsight, what would you do differently?
I don't have an answer for that because we had everything worked out favorably for us. So I'm not going to try and second guess myself on that.
Oh, there probably were minor things where I wish I had this or I wish I hadn't had that, didn't have that, whatever. But everything went, relatively smoothly. And we got to see I got to see some of the things that I wanted to in that section of the world. I don't know what it would be like to do it today with all the communications that you have now. That would be so different. You felt isolated. You didn't feel, you felt away from home, very much away from home. Now, taking into consideration the situation now where you are. Now, did I hear that you were not able to go on shore, that they had restrictions because of the COVID-19 virus?
Yeah, that's correct. We
See, that there was nothing like that for us to be concerned with.
And there was no piracy at the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess with all the military out there, with you just have to if right after the war, so that was a good time to sneak on through there.
I think our timing was good, but that's just by accident. I mean, you never know. But I think our timing was good in that respect. The war, of course, kept us. Maybe we would have had a shorter trip, because we went back. We left the boat in New Zealand when the war started, and came back to the boat 3 months later, I think it was.
Well, we went home to see our mothers, and when the minute I got off the airplane, they asked me to go shoot something, and then there were delays with that. We were only going to be home for a week, and that delay was costly to us because of the changing of weather. Of course, the boat was in New Zealand at the time.
And when we came back, of course, now it's the time of year when the fishing again is going to be good on the reef. And we went up to the reef and we did our diving and fishing again. So we had 2 years of that on the Great Barrier Reef. And that was, for me, it was sensational. I mean, we got to fish with people who were very experienced, because there weren't that many boats that were doing this. And the captains were very helpful to us, because this was big fishing of marlin that we had not done before. And we got a lot of help, and it was just, and the diving was wonderful. I got most of my diving there, and of course in Fiji and the Maldives. Well, that Maldives would be ahead of us, but in Fiji, coming across, a lot of good diving there too, and good diving off the reef. But after the second season of fishing, then we went on our way, and that's, I guess, Bruce decided that was the time we might as well keep going to the west.
When you finished your circumnavigation, I believe you continued to live aboard and continued to stay on Zopilote and keep on boating around?
We technically finished our circumnavigation at Bermuda.
Because
we had been there before with this boat, and so that technically was it. And we just proceeded to Florida. And in Florida, the reason that we had kept going from Singapore, where what had happened was my original intention was to ship the boat home from Australia, but things changed. The war started, all of that stuff. So I decided it was easier to go to Singapore. And by the time I got there to pick up a ship, I figured the boat needed to be painted anyway. It was much easier to paint them in Florida. So I just decided to run the boat to Florida. And then when we got to Florida, we kept the boat there, spent the winter there, got the boat painted, just took our time, and then we brought the boat back to the West Coast, finishing into Marina del Rey on Labor Day.
Let's see.
In
May of '93.
What a magnificent cruise, and plenty of things that were different about cruising around in a motor vessel. And I think it's so interesting to have this interview with you and such a different perspective of that rather than the sailor's point of view. Is there any other subject that you would like to expound on before we wrap up the interview?
The main thing Bruce has always said, make plans, but don't hesitate. If the weather is not to your liking, don't say, I've got a schedule, I have to be someplace, because that will get you in trouble every time. And that's what he's always said. Make all the details, all the plans, make sure you've got everything you need to know, But if you have to tell somebody you won't be able to be there for another week, that's just the way it is. The only other thing I'd like to say is, I know the people that you're with there, they're all doing their adventure, what they want to do, and people put it off sometimes too long. And that's a mistake. If you have the ability to do it, the time to do it, the finances to be able to do it, don't put it off any longer. Just go ahead and do it. You'll be unhappy if you do.
Well, I often start, as you are aware of, I think, that I speak at boat shows all the time, at all the trawler fests, and I always think about when I used to stay when I started some of my seminars, was I think I've made every mistake in boating that can be made till the next time I leave the dock. It's just a learning experience for all of us. And if any of you that are listening to this would like to have more information the next time you see a trawler fest happening, come up and introduce yourself, and I'll be glad to lend what little knowledge I have to you.
All right, Bruce, that's very nice, very kind, a humble answer from a person that has had many achievements. And I think it's wonderful that you have been such an advocate for people on boats, the cruising life, and for the motor vessels, and encouraging people, if they would like to try that type of life, to do it. And I appreciate so much all of the time that you spent with us, you and Joan, and all of the tales you had to tell, and the wonderful words of wisdom and advice. And we think that this is going to be a really great addition to the Circumnavigators Summit, coming from that point of view. And we thank you so much for your participation. And once again, on behalf of the SSCA, thank you both, Bruce and Joan.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Luke. We had fun.
Continue your adventures.
If you enjoyed this interview, make sure to listen to our other guests in the series, subscribe to SSCA YouTube channel, access the MP3 audio recording on SSCA website. Get the scoop on the latest SSCA activities and benefits, read the latest cruiser bulletin, participate in the forum and Facebook group, and please promote our organization to who you think might benefit.